Hey folks, this is another video in a series that aspires to teach Google Apps Script's spreadsheet app to beginners. In previous lessons, we've learned how to access Google Sheet workbooks, how to create them from scratch, how to make copies, how to access spreadsheets, how to extract data, how to dynamically calculate ranges, and how to write to sheets. We'll be resuming by navigating to the Files module, and we are going to be creating a new script file. We're going to be focusing on how to extract data from one sheet and how to write that data to another sheet in the same workbook. We're going to be titling this G_sheet extractor, sheet extract. Great. So we're going to change the name of the function to sheet extract, and we will save our project. I'm going to resume on line 2. We're going to hit enter once, 2 slashes for a comment, and we will access the workbook with our data. I'm going to hit enter, tab, and we're going to declare a variable called WB, and we'll set it equal to spreadsheet app dot. Now at this time, you're going to use one of 3 methods in order to access your workbook. It depends on your situation. If you are attempting to read and write from the same workbook that your app script was created from, then you can use .open or get active spreadsheet. That's what I'm doing. I'm just going to be giving you a basic example of how to read data from one sheet and then write it to another sheet. So I'm going to be staying in the same workbook. If you are attempting to read and write to a different workbook than the one that your app script is attached to, then you're going to want to use either open by ID or .open by URL. So I'm going to use get active spreadsheet. I'm going to have an open parentheses. I'm going to hit the right arrow once. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on my keyboard twice, and now I will access the sheet with the data I want to extract. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to declare a variable called sheet, and then I'm going to also add to it, I'll call it sheet source so that my naming doesn't get messed up with the name of my function. So we're just going to call this sheet source, and we're going to set it equal to wb.getSheet_by_name, and we'll have an open parentheses here, open parentheses, and we will pass one argument, which will be the name of the sheet as a string. So I'm going to go back to my workbook, and you can see that I have a tab here called data. So I am going to type data into the getSheetByName method. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment. And now I am going to extract the data. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to declare a variable called data. I'm going to set it equal to sheet source dot get range. I use an open parentheses, and I'm going to go back to my sheet. And now I'm going to define the range. So I need to identify where the data starts, which is the first row, identify where the data starts, which is the first column, right? So we are starting here at cell A1. We have 11 rows of data and 4 columns of data. So what we could do is we could write in 1, 1, because we want to start at row 1 and column 1, and we need to go 11 rows across 3 columns, right? And then we can get, we'll do display values because I don't want to do any math, and we'll have open parentheses. But as we touched on in our range access lesson, we don't want to hard code our data in the event that the data expands or contracts. So we're going to be dynamically extracting our data. So instead of defining the number of rows that we want to go, we are going to use our sheet source variable to get the last row. So we'll do sheet source dot get last row. We'll have an open parentheses, and then we will use the same method or a similar method and do sheet source dot get last column. Have an open parentheses. Cool. So make sure that you have sheet source or sheet or whatever your variable is where you're extracting your data, and do dot get last row. Make sure you have open parentheses in there, comma, sheet source dot get last column, open parentheses in there. And then at the end of your get range method, use dot get display values. So we're going to add a semicolon at the end there. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will be logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to do logger.log, and we'll have an open parentheses, and we will pass in our data variable. We're going to hit run, and now you should see the data from your sheet appearing in your console log. Now, the thing that we want to start noticing here is that we have 2 sets of square brackets at the beginning, 2 sets of square brackets at the end. That is a very strong indication that this is a 2-dimensional array. And as we discussed in our Write Sheets lesson, data that is extracted from Google Sheets is either going to be structured as an array or a 2-dimensional array. I should say bulk data. So because we are extracting multiple values from our sheet, we are returning a 2-dimensional array through the get display values method. Now, we could also use get values, and it will also be structured as a 2-dimensional array. The only difference between get display values and values is that get values is returning the unformatted data. So you can see here that in our second array, we are returning integer for 1200. And when we do display values, we return a string. It is formatted the way that it is in the sheet as US currency. Cool. So now that we have our data, we are going to resume on line 13. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow 4 times on our keyboard, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will define the destination sheet. So this is where we want to write the data. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable of sheet dest, which is short for destination. And we're going to set that equal to wb.getSheetByName, open parentheses, single quotes. I'm going to go back to my sheet, and the place that I want to write it is sheet 2. So I'm going to copy sheet 2, and I'm going to paste it into getSheetByName. I'm going to hit the right arrow twice and add a semicolon. So in this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to read data from one sheet in our workbook in order to write it to another. Anytime that you are writing data to a new place, you want to be very careful that you are not overwriting data that you don't want to overwrite. So it is very important that you have sheet source as your variable on line 7 and sheet destination as your destination variable on line 16. You don't have to use those names, but you should have distinct names so you don't get confused about which sheet you are using. Now, if you are looking to read data from one workbook and send it to another, I have some other videos on my channel that show you more sophisticated ways of reading and writing to sheets. We're going to keep this nice and simple because this is a beginner series. So we're just going to be focusing on reading and writing data. So we're going to resume on line 16. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard twice, and now we will write the data to our sheet. We're going to hit enter and tab. So we are going to reference our sheet destination variable. We're going to use the dot method, and we are going to say get range. And we are now going to define where we want to write this data to using the 4 arguments within get range. So the first thing that we want to define is the row that we want to start at. So we're going to start at row 1. We want to write to column 1, which means that the first cell with data will be cell A1. Now we're going to have to get a little bit more dynamic in terms of how we are going to figure out our row numbers and our column numbers. So we're going to add in a comma, and we have to define the number of rows, right? So if we just did sheet destination dot get range and we did dot set values and we did an open parentheses and then we wrote in data and we hit the right arrow and we add a semicolon, we're going to get an error. And the reason for that is because the number of rows in the data does not match the number of rows in the range. The data has 11, but the range has 1. So when we go back in sheet 2, there's some stuff in there from a previous lesson, but nothing like name, location, number, all that type of stuff. So what we could do is we see that the data has 11 rows, but the range has 1. So we're going to add a comma, and we're going to enter in 11. So if we hit run, we're going to get another error. And the reason for that is because the number of columns in the data does not match the number of columns in the range. The data has 4, but the range has 1. So we could hard code the number 4 in here, and when we hit run, we have no errors, and we go back to our sheet, and now you can see that we have written data from the data tab to sheet 2. But the problem with that is that in the event that we delete a column and we delete 2 rows, we try to run this again, we'll get another error because now the data has 9 rows, but the range has 11, right? So we have 11 here, but we have 9 rows of data, so we have to manually change 11 to 9. And now we have the issue where we have 3 rows or 3 columns of data, but the range has 4. So we have to manually change the 4 to a 3 and hit run. And now it successfully works. And when we go to sheet 2, you can see we have some existing stuff here, which is a hazard of reading and writing to sheets, that when you write to a sheet, you will end up having pre-existing data, right? So when we ran our data extraction the first time, we had columns, we had column D and we had rows 10 and 11, but now we have rows 9 and through column C. So what I'm going to do, just so that you can see this more clearly, is I'm going to delete this data and I'm going to rerun it. And now you can see that we are getting the data that exists in the data tab. But this is a problem that you are going to want to keep in mind as you think about structuring your project. Because when you use the set values or the set value method in order to write to a sheet, you are just going to set those values. So if your data set contracts, you are not going to remove the values that were previously there. So if you are completely updating a sheet, meaning you don't want to append to it or something like that, it would be wise to write in something like this. So we're going to go to line 16. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will clear the destination sheet before writing. So we hit enter and tab, and we can do sheet dest dot get range. And we'll type in 1, 1, 9, 3 dot clear, and you'll have an open parentheses like this, and you'll have a semicolon, so that in the event that, like you can see previously, we had 9 rows of data, 3 columns here, and then we will hit run. And when I go to my sheet, you might not even be able to see it, but it will clear it out before writing into the sheet. So what we're going to do is we are going to change from having 3 columns to 2, just so that you can see this a little bit more clearly. And we are going to have 7 rows of data. So we are going to delete this number column here, and we are going to delete 2 more rows of data so that we have 7 rows across 2 columns. But in our sheet 2, you can see we still have 3 columns across 9 rows. So when we hit run, we're not getting any errors. You can see our data has changed in our console log, And now in sheet 2, you can see that we have not cleared out all these rows in here because we still defined clearing rows 7 and 2. So there's a couple things that we need to do here, which is to dynamically reference our ranges. So what we need to do is calculate the number of rows and columns that we want to clear, as well as the number of rows and columns that we want to write to. So this is where measurement is going to come into play. So we're going to begin on line 19, and we are going to refer to our sheet destination variable. We're going to do .get capital M max rows, and we're going to have an open parentheses. And then we are going to go to our columns argument, and we are going to do sheet destination .get max columns, and we'll have an open parentheses. So what will happen now is instead of having this appear as name, location, number, and then having these 2 extra rows that previously existed that have since been deleted, we are going to clear every row and every column in the sheet, regardless of whether or not there is data in them. And then we are going to write the data to our sheet with our hard-coded range size. So we're going to hit run. We have no errors, and we go back to our sheet. And now you can see that instead of having the data that used to be there when we previously ran this, we now have data that represents what is happening on our sheet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add, I'm going to, no, this is good. So I'm going to copy column C so that I can put it back in there. And then I am going to copy row 8 and 9 so I can put that back in there. And now when we run, we're going to get an error, right? And that's because we have that dynamic issue that we were talking about. But you can see that we successfully cleared our entire sheet, right? So the reason that we didn't write anything here is because we were still referencing 7 rows and 2 columns, but we now have 9 rows and 3 columns. So what happened in our script was we cleared out the range so that we had the opportunity to send in the fresh data. So now what we're going to do is we can do a couple things here. We could reference the sheet source using get last row and get last column. So what we're going to do is we're going to comment out line 22 just so that we can do some workshopping here so that you can see the different methods available to you. So either highlight line 22 and hit Command if you're on a Mac, or Control if you're on Windows, and then the slash button, and then that'll comment out your code. You could also hold it down and re-comment it, or you can just go to the left of line 22 and add 2 slashes for a comment. But we're going to comment it out because we don't want to set values for a little bit. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to hit the left arrow on our keyboard twice, and now we are going to explore our dynamic data range solutions. We're going to hit enter and tab. So the first option that we have is logger.log, and we could do sheet source dot get capital L last row, and we'll have an open parentheses. So we're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice, and we're going to add a semicolon, and we're going to hit run. So you can see that we're getting that number 9 dynamically now, right? So when we go to our sheet, we're getting this here, right? We're getting the last row of data, which is the number 9. Now, some people have the opinion that you don't want to reference spreadsheet app more than you have to. So technically, when you're calling a sheet source, you are using spreadsheet app .getActiveSpreadsheet.get sheet by name. Even though you're using this variable here, you're still calling the spreadsheet app which might impact runtime. I'm not as concerned about that, but I do think it is a realistic consideration, especially as your projects get larger. So the other option that you have is, so we're going to be on line 25, we're going to hit enter. You can do logger.log, open parentheses. You could just measure the length of the data array. So we could do data.length, and when we hit run, you're also getting 9. Now, again, I personally think you're still, you're doing the same thing here, so it really doesn't matter what you do. So you could measure the length of your extracted data in order to dynamically determine the length, or you could use your source and use get last row. But for our purposes, I guess what we'll do is we'll go with data.length. That's probably the best practice to go with because that is what you are attempting to write to the sheet. So you should have a consistent method for reading and writing. So we are now going to explore. We're going to hit enter twice, hit left arrow twice, and we'll do explore our dynamic column solutions. And I'm also going to change this from data range to data row. And actually, I'm just going to delete row, dynamic row solutions. So we have basically the same thing. We're going to hit enter once, tab, logger.log, open parentheses, sheet, source.get, capital L, last, capital C, column, open parentheses. We're going to hit the right arrow twice, add a semicolon, hit enter once, logger.log, open parentheses, sheet, source. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's sheet source square bracket 0. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard. Dot length, and we'll add a semicolon at the end. And when we hit run, we should now see 2 instances of 9. And my apologies, sheet source dot length didn't work. Oh, sorry. It should have been data. So on line 30, we should do data square bracket 0 dot length instead of sheet source square bracket 0 dot length. So data square bracket 0 dot length. So now when we hit run, we should get 9933. Cool. So you can see these are your 2 options here. It's really up to you which one you want to use. But these are the 2 methods for dynamically establishing how big your data set is so that you can pass in variables to get range. So at this time, we are going to highlight line 22, and we're going to hit Command if you're on a Mac, Control if you're on Windows, and the slash button. And if that doesn't work, then you can just delete the 2 slashes at the beginning of line 22. And now instead of having a hard-coded number of rows, we are going to use data.length for our row numbers, and then we are going to remove the hard-coded 2 so that we can do data square bracket 0, go to the right of the square bracket, dot length. And now when we hit run, we have successfully written our data to sheet 2. So if we remove a column of data or we remove rows, we can go back to our sheet, hit run, and now you can see we are dynamically defining how big the data is. We are clearing out the sheet so that we are no longer having data exist from a previous version, and we now have a contracted set of data. Additionally, we could add in new stuff, right? Like this. We could add in lots of stuff like that, and we could add in some new rows. And when we go to sheet 2, you can see that we have dynamically calculated that expansion of the data set, and we have written to the sheet, and then we are going to contract it once again. And you can see that the sheet is dynamically responding so that now it has contracted and removed data that doesn't exist. So this is an example of writing to a sheet where you don't want to append values, right? So you have a data set that you want to be uniform with another data set where you copy all the data, and then write all the data.
I hope you found this video helpful. If you'd like to learn more about Google Apps Script or the spreadsheet app, then check out the playlist in the description.